Don't say it. Don't you say it.
Left.
Come on!
The Marvel Cinematic Universe has not exactly been firing on all cylinders lately. The conclusion of the Infinity Saga in Phase 3 marked an end of sorts for this franchise, with Phase 4 feeling like some kind of tacked-on DLC that just never soared to the heights of what came before. Yeah, there were outliers like Spider-Man No Way Home, but for every No Way Home, there were absolute abominations like She-Hulk and Thor Love and Thunder, which basically solidified that the MCU had just completely lost its mind. And I said this in the last video where I went into detail on why the MCU was falling apart, that the MCU feels more like homework than an event these days due to every MCU product just being so aggressively mediocre or just straight up bad, as well as the oversaturation of shows and films. And after watching Ant-Man Quantumania, yeah, nothing's changed. Here we are with Phase 4 in the rearview mirror and Phase 5 kicking off with Ant-Man Quantumania. What many people were hoping was a turning point for the MCU to get it back on track, to try and recapture some of that magic that made the Infinity Saga so great. Yep, spoiler alert, it didn't do that. Quantumania was all over the place. Marvel, what are you doing? This was supposed to be what got things back on track, the introduction of the next Thanos. Yet you've delivered what critics have called the second worst film of the MCU ever. Now, I'm not saying we should always trust critics, trust me, we really bloody shouldn't, but I think they're not that far off the mark here. So today we're going to dive deep into how we got to this point, how the MCU got to a point where it needed a C-level character in Ant-Man to try and save it from its aggressive mediocrity, and how that ant-sized savior failed to do so. But before we do, a word from today's sponsor. This video is brought to you by Atlas VPN, the best VPN on the market. VPNs are growing increasingly important as it's becoming harder and harder to keep your information private online and away from prying eyes. Atlas VPN not only protects you online, but also blocks all malicious links, ads, and trackers and lets you know if someone has gotten a hold of your data. You can also protect unlimited devices with a single subscription. You can also keep your searches private and also save money online when you shop, whether that be something like Spotify or Netflix. Speaking of Netflix, one of the best things about Atlas is the fact that I can switch my location to the US so I can enjoy US Netflix, because the Netflix in Australia absolutely sucks. Just the click of a few buttons and boom, I'm in the US. It's super easy. So this way you can unlock your favorite content from all over the world no matter where you are. So get on this deal quick, because Atlas VPN Premium is just $1.83 per month plus 3 months extra, as well as a 30-day money-back guarantee. Protect your privacy and get all the benefits of Atlas VPN at a super low price. All you got to do is click the link in the description below to land yourself this deal. Get on it quick though, because it's only for a limited time. And thank you to Atlas VPN for sponsoring this video and helping me not panic over YouTube's copyright system. Now, in order to dive deep into why Quantumania was such a big disappointment and why it was unfair to put the MCU on its shoulders in the first place, let's dive deep on how we even got to this point. To the point where you need Ant-Man to save your franchise. Now look, Endgame capped off phases 1 to 3 and the Infinity Saga off incredibly well. A super satisfying and dramatic end to over 10 years of storytelling. In its own isolated bubble, the Infinity Saga is the MCU at its absolute best. Yeah, there were some poop stains like Thor the Dark World sprinkled in there, but 95% of the time, it was, at worst, enjoyable and entertaining storytelling. I remember after Endgame came out wondering, just how could they possibly top that? Tony and Cap are gone, Thanos is dead, how can the stakes get higher than what they've already been? Is it possibly time to lay down the gauntlet and let the franchise rest and go out on a high? How naive of me. You think Hollywood would do that? Hell no. Enter Phase 4 of the MCU. Absolute shite compared to what came before, but that's okay because it made money. Gone were the likable characters, the interesting stories, the comedy that was actually funny. All it was now was incompetent and underqualified filmmakers playing with the leftovers of the Infinity Saga, with this strong emphasis on pushing modern day politics on the audience instead of actually telling a good story with likable characters. And turning characters that were left from when this franchise was good and turning them into the butt end of a joke. Making the OG characters look like completely incompetent morons to make the new characters look better is a staple of modern MCU films. These new characters with their fast-tracked character development because, well, it's just a gender-swapped version of the character that came before, and that's all the character development you need apparently. The oversaturation of mediocre content plagued the entirety of Phase 4 of the MCU. We went from a handful of films per phase in the Infinity Saga to a handful of films, but also about half a dozen TV shows as well in Phase 4. Most of which were mid at best, some of them were genuinely complete garbage.
Infinitely more than you.
The very idea of less is more was nothing more than a foreign concept for Marvel in Phase 4, and it made keeping up with the MCU an absolute slog. Back in the Infinity Saga, each film felt like an event, something that you just simply couldn't miss. And I've spoken about this before, but I feel like it's important to emphasize this because a lot of people feel this way, and that was that it was just hard keeping up with the MCU since Endgame. It was just hard. It felt like homework. Because there was a new show or film coming out every 5 seconds. And I mean, you can't not watch it or you might miss what comes later down the line. So, you try your best to watch it anyway, despite the fact that the shows are not very good, the films are not very good. But you're still an MCU fan, so you gotta keep up with it, right? But it was genuinely a chore just to keep up with the overarching narrative of Phase 4, which brings me on to another issue. There was no overarching narrative of Phase 4. You see the problem here. They pumped out endless content with the idea of a shared cinematic universe, so you feel like you need to keep up with it all, for most things to literally mean nothing in the overarching context of the MCU anyway. The very idea of a cinematic universe is that you can watch everything that comes out because it's connected. This was easy and fun to do in the Infinity Saga because there wasn't an oversaturation. Because of that, each project felt like it had more thought put into it, therefore a better end product. Phase 1 of the MCU had 6 films. Phase 2 had 6 films. Phase 3 had 11 films. So 3 phases and 23 films in 11 years. Not a bad ratio. But Phase 4 had 17 films and shows in less than 2 years. Think about that for a second. 17 films and shows in less than 2 years. And people wonder why the quality bar of the MCU has dropped so dramatically. The amount of content in the entire MCU since its start in 2008 nearly doubled within less than 2 years. This is the very definition of oversaturation. Not to mention, despite having an overabundance of content, it failed to progress any overarching narrative. 6 films in earlier phases sent the overall story so much further despite having only a fraction of the films to do so. I mean, it just felt like the Infinity Saga was the main course and Phase 4 is the leftovers, and there's a lot of fucking leftovers. Now look, the comic book genre has been hammered to death in the past decade or so, we know this, but the comic book genre is not creatively bankrupt yet. The Batman last year proved that. Comic book movies can still be good, there's no denying it. This is a Marvel problem, this is an MCU problem. It's honestly a little bit worrying that across 17 films and shows in Phase 4, your best product was a film that showcased the worst and laziest tropes of Hollywood today. Not to mention it's actually more Sony's film than anything. The unapologetic nostalgia of No Way Home was pretty hard to not get wrapped up in. But when such a cheap move is your best product, that should set off serious alarm bells. So Phase 4 as a whole, a complete and utter shit show, with some stuff that was decent. But most of it, on average, was just mid as hell, which for the MCU is not good enough. There was no overarching narrative, there was absolutely no focus, character inconsistencies, character assassinations, oversaturation, all of this put a ton of pressure on the next phase of the MCU, that being Phase 5, where we are right now, which takes us onto Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantamania.
Ants! Ants! Ant-Man!
Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania. Where do I even begin with this one? Look, is it worse than Thor Love and Thunder or She-Hulk? No, it's not. It's not even close. It's probably about on par or even slightly better than films like, say, Eternals or Iron Man 2. Not exactly the company you want to be in, but not a complete disaster. Now, the Ant-Man films in the past, they've been pretty decent. The first Ant-Man was a super refreshing palate cleanser. The stakes weren't overly high. It was just a heist film with Paul Rudd as the lead. It wasn't groundbreaking, it was just a lower level, fun, superhero flick that didn't take itself overly seriously, and that was the charm of Paul Rudd's Ant-Man. As for Ant-Man and the Wasp, it was definitely a step down from its predecessor, but it was a fine, again, lower stakes, more contained story, and a nice shift in tone considering we were coming off the back of Infinity War when that came out, and we all needed a little bit of a break from the dramatic after that ending. So the Ant-Man films of the past, they were very ground level in nature, but now in Phase 5, it's got the entire weight of the MCU on its shoulders. It's got to deal with the baggage of the wasted time in Phase 4, and does it handle it? No, it really doesn't. Scott Lang is not Cap, he's not Iron Man, he's not Thor, he's not Doctor Strange. Ant-Man works in the context of the smaller films, the ground level, low stakes outings. And when it comes to the ensemble films, he works well as a supporting character. Ant-Man films are supposed to be the palate cleanser from the big MCU movies, not the savior of the entire damn franchise. So there is that part of me that's going a little bit easier on this film because it's receiving the after effects of Phase 4, which I think is the reason that a lot of people really don't like it. And it's not really the film's fault. I honestly think the reason many people are having this harsh reaction to Quantumania is because of Phase 4 and Phase 4 alone. What is the film's fault is the fact that mostly everything about it falls flat except for its villain. So let's talk about Kang. Jonathon Majors elevates the shit out of this script to make Kang one of the more interesting characters we've seen in the MCU post-Endgame. In Quantumania's just over 2-hour runtime, I probably really liked about 10 minutes of the entire film. I'm telling you, Kang was in every single second of that 10 minutes. He is the reason to watch this film. After Quantumania, do I think this guy is going to be as good as Thanos? Maybe. I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of him than we did Thanos though. Whether that be through variants or what have you, but Jonathon Majors, man, is just an absolute Chad. His screen presence is infectious. When this guy is on screen, you are locked in. You definitely buy that this guy is not really to be messed with. He doesn't feel like a mustache twirling villain, and if this film couldn't prove that Kang was actually a villain worthy of probably 20 or more films and shows worth of build up, then the future prospects of the MCU would just be pointless to get excited for. But again, the reasons to watch Quantumania begin and end with Kang. Everything else in this film does not really work. But if I do have one gripe with Kang in this film, it's his power level. The dude is the new Thanos, he's got to be powerful, and he's probably going to get even more powerful going forward. But he got his ass whooped by a C-tier superhero. How is Kang supposed to be the next Thanos when he can't beat a dude that looks like he works at Baskin and Robbins over the weekends? I feel like Thor or Scarlet Witch could have been tagged into this film and killed Kang on the spot. Look, again, I know that Kang is going to evolve into the big bad. You know, this probably isn't his final form, but I'd be disingenuous to not mention that there were a few times where I was like, dude, Kang's getting his ass whooped by Ant-Man. Ant-Man, out of everyone, despite the fact that this dude is being hyped up as a bigger and badder Thanos. Like, I don't know.
Is this your game? Huh?
This would have been a perfect situation to do what the MCU is pretty afraid to do most of the time, and that is kill off its lead character. Walking out of Quantumania, yeah, Kang's a badass and sure to be a threat down the line, but it would have been more impactful if he, I don't know, killed Scott. Look, I don't want to see my boy Paul Rudd leave the MCU because he's about the only actor left that's naturally funny, but character and universe wise, in establishing the threat of Kang, this probably would have been a better option to add more weight to his introduction. But yeah, that's a gripe I have. He'll probably evolve into a bigger threat than he is here, I know that. But to close off the subject of Kang, this is the best way to sum up my experience watching Quantumania. When Kang wasn't on screen, this was me. When Kang was on screen, this was me. That is this film in a nutshell. Kang good, everything else, not so much. So speaking of that not so much, let's talk CGI. 95% of this film takes place in the quantum realm. The problem with this is that Marvel has had a bit of a CGI problem in recent years. They've gotten way too over-reliant on CGI to plug the holes in their filmmaking. Like, if you're sick of Marvel's CGI problem, this film is going to send you to therapy. Because 95% of Quantumania is pure CGI noise, and it is not the escapist experience that you'd be hoping for. I get that they're in the quantum realm for majority of the film, but come on, man. This entire film was built inside a VFX artist computer. Very rarely were there moments in this film where I bought even for a second that these actors weren't standing in a room full of green sheets or on the volume set. There are moments in here that genuinely gave me Spy Kids vibes and Jesus, Shark Boy and Lava Girl vibes. If you know, you know. Look, I dunk on the MODOK CGI because it looked absolutely awful, but given how this character looks in the comics, it's probably accurate, to be honest. But I mean, the green screen just stands out like a sore thumb here. It completely takes you out of the film. About halfway through Quantumania, you just feel mentally drained by all the visual noise. Like, this film was seriously built in post-production. I know most of the big MCU films are, but this one felt like it went too far. But let's talk the other characters of the film that aren't Kang. Scott, you know, he's fine. It's Paul Rudd being Paul Rudd. He's still likable. He's funny. He has some jokes that land. And, you know, it's Paul Rudd. Like, he's like a puppy. You can't hate him. As for Cassie, though, this character didn't really work. They play with the idea that she's an in and out of jail kind, just like her dad was. But then on the side, she's just this scientific genius with her work regarding the quantum realm. Like, it just felt so forced, and it didn't really make any sense. It's like the writers intentionally shoehorned her attitude and bad girl persona just so they could try and develop some father-daughter moments to give the film more levity. But none of it felt natural at all. And Michael Douglas just feels like he's there in this film out of contractual obligation as Hank Pym. He has a few funny moments, but he kind of just has a quippy one-liner and then sits in the background for 20 minutes. Like, that's Hank Pym's role in this film. You've got Michael Douglas there, man. Use him. But the character that annoyed me the most in this film is Janet. If you've seen the film, you know exactly why. There are several times in this film that she could legitimately just tell the characters around her what's going on and why, but she just doesn't do it. And why doesn't she do it?
So the movie can happen.
She withholds information from the film's characters just so the plot can progress, and it is so frustrating. I was actually made aware of this before I even watched the film, so when I was watching it, I was on the lookout for this, and it is so obvious. They could have come up with some creative ideas for her to withhold information other than Michelle Pfeiffer just taking really long pauses every time someone asks her what's going on before, oh, explosions, can't have that conversation now. I hate it when films do that, and it really, really bugged me. As for MODOK, I mean, it's Darren Cross from the first Ant-Man, which is kinda cool, I guess. I can dunk on how he looks all day long, but the dumbest part about MODOK for me is that he is responsible for a lot of the film's tonal inconsistencies. We'll have a scene where things are ultra serious with Kang, then MODOK comes along and it turns into an SNL sketch. Not to mention, MODOK's redemption in this film boils down to Cassie telling him to not be a dick. And I'm not even joking, it's like, oi MODOK, don't be a dick. And he's like, oh, I never thought of that. And then he's redeemed. Like, do Marvel think that their audience is 4 years old or something? Like, am I missing something here? Oh, and also, where the hell is Michael Pena? I needed that man in this film, even if it was for 5 seconds. One storytelling scene from him and Quantumania goes up one level.
I missed him a lot today.
Look, man, Quantumania is just junk food cinema. That's all it is. And that is just so disappointing given the expectations that were put on this film by not just fans, but Marvel as well. Look, some people are probably really going to like this film. It wouldn't surprise me. And you know what? That's fine. I can see why some people would dig Quantumania. Again, it's not a complete disaster. It's not a She-Hulk or anything like that, but it's definitely bottom quarter of the MCU. But the fact that the only thing that really works in this film is its villain, that's really worrying. I can't remember where I saw this, but I saw a headline that summed this film up perfectly, which said something along the lines of Ant-Man Quantumania is junk food when we were expecting a 5-course meal. And I think that's a perfect summary of this film. Fans felt malnourished after the emptiness of Phase 4, and they were looking for something to really sink their teeth into with Quantumania, and it just didn't deliver. Marvel really needed this film to be an absolute home run, and it crawled its way to first base off the back of its villain. So, where does Quantumania leave the MCU going forward? What does the future hold with the context of Quantumania in the rearview mirror? Well, I can't lie, my faith in the MCU going forward has definitely taken another hit off the back of this film, because it just proved to me that the MCU cannot recapture the magic from the Infinity Saga. They've lost it. Now, the future of the MCU is presumably just going to build up toward Kang Dynasty and Secret Wars. The thing is, if Phase 4 is any indication, they've got to change things up. This means they actually have to, you know, have an overarching narrative going forward, not just pump out endless shows that mean nothing like with Phase 4. Disney Plus is going to play a large role in the multiverse saga, unfortunately, because it hasn't really done a whole lot of that so far. Loki was good, but everything else was mid or genuinely terrible. So the approach on Disney Plus just has to change going into phases 5 and 6. Disney Plus is probably the most disappointing streaming platform out there. The amount of short season 35-minute episode shit that gets pumped onto that platform is just horrendous, and people are over it. Whether it's Marvel or Star Wars, there are more misses than hits on that platform. And dude, Marvel need to start hitting because people have already started to lose faith in the MCU. And it's only going to get worse if we have a repeat of Phase 4. To be honest, I think it'd be pretty hard for Kevin Feige to ignore the negative response to most of Phase 4. So I'd be shocked if the MCU going forward didn't see some big changes. But on the same hand, I wouldn't be shocked if they kept doing the same shit that derailed the franchise in the first place. I think the future of the MCU is completely up in the air right now. I feel like it's going to either derail completely or it's going to get back on track and soar to similar heights that it saw with Infinity War and Endgame. Disney Plus going forward is probably going to be like what we saw in Loki season 1. Our protagonist going up against a variant of Kang. I think that's going to be the formula going forward. And to be honest, that's a better option than having She-Hulk go up against an incel from a Reddit group or whatever the hell that shit was.
Yeah, come at me, bro!
Now, as for future MCU installments, I can't lie, a lot of the stuff coming up in Phase 5 looks very skippable, which again, is a shame considering how the MCU used to be this machine of releasing things that you just couldn't miss. But what have we got? We've got Guardians of the Galaxy 3. That looks great. We've also got the Marvels coming out. I can't wait for that. I can barely contain my excitement. I bet it's going to be fantastic. We've also got Loki season 2, which I think has a lot of promise. The first season was probably the best MCU show so far, so that I'm down for. We've also got Ironheart and Echo, you know, whatever. Agatha, Coven of Darkness, whatever the hell they're calling it. This thing could be good, so I'm willing to give this one a fair shake. We also have Daredevil, yes please. Blade, yes please. Deadpool 3, yes fucking please. Like, there is a lot of stuff to look forward to, but man, there's a lot of shit that makes you wonder why they're even bothering with it. So the MCU going forward is going to be an absolute ride. Quantamania has definitely given me a little less optimism than I had because, again, it shows that even with Phase 4 out of the way, they're still prone to misfires. But one thing is for sure. Whether the MCU captures the magic it used to have or it unravels into a complete disaster, it's going to be pretty entertaining.